Welcome to the third hour of Morning Joe on this Thursday, September 26th. Along with Joe, Willie, and me, we have the host of Way Too Early, White House Bureau Chief at Politico, Jonathan Lemire. U.S. National Editor at the Financial Times, Ed Luce is with us. Columnist and Associate Editor for the Washington Post, David Ignatius is here. And Congressional Investigations Reporter for the Washington Post, Jackie Alemany. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky will meet with President Biden at the White House today, where he is expected to present his so-called victory plan for the war in Ukraine. President Biden is expected to formally announce a $375 million aid package for Ukraine, the largest since the summer, and the 66th aid package the U.S. has provided the country since August of 2021. Meanwhile, a meeting between former President Trump and President Zelensky will not be happening today. The two leaders were expected to meet at Trump Tower. When asked why the meeting was canceled, a source familiar with the matter pointed to Zelensky's interview with The New Yorker this week, in which the Ukrainian president called Trump's running mate, Senator J.D. Vance, too radical, adding, quote, his message seems to be that Ukraine must make a sacrifice. At his rally in North Carolina yesterday, former President Trump continued to criticize Zelensky.
Look at the war in Ukraine, and I think it's something we have to have a quick discussion about, because the president of Ukraine is in our country, and he's making little nasty aspersions toward your favorite president, me. It would have never happened if I were president, to start off with. And there didn't even have to be a settlement. It wouldn't have happened, period. Russia wouldn't have gone in. I spoke to Putin about it a lot. I got along very well with Putin. I spoke to him a lot. I watched this poor guy yesterday at the United Nations. He didn't know what he was saying. They just don't know what to do. They're locked into a situation. It's sad. They just don't know what to do, because Ukraine is gone. It's not Ukraine anymore. You can never replace those cities and towns, and you can never replace the dead people, so many dead people. Any deal, even the worst deal, would have been better than what we have right now. If they made a bad deal, it would have been much better. They would have given up a little bit, and everybody would be living, and every building would be built.
Thank you so much for your insights, Neville Chamberlain. Peace at all costs, peace in our times. You know, David Ignatius, I've got to say, it's really kind of hard to be shocked by Donald Trump's Republican Party in 2024 after 9. And yet, we have, over the past several days, seen his crowds cheering for Vladimir Putin, seemingly booing, Vladimir Zelensky. Donald Trump talking about how, saying one positive thing after another positive thing about Vladimir Putin every time he speaks of Putin, and constantly criticizing Zelensky, constantly criticizing Ukraine, constantly suggesting if he's president, he's going to end the war at once. And yesterday even cited a Vanderbilt poll that was taken last year. They asked self-identified MAGA voters, who do you think is a better president? Russia's autocrat, Vladimir Putin, or Joe Biden, America's democratically elected president? 52% said Putin was the better president. Only 18% of these Republicans said the American president was a better president. Talk about not only how surprising that is, but I've just got to say how challenging that is for our country, that you have a large chunk of Americans that have been moving towards an autocrat because their leader is so supportive of an autocrat.
Joe, it's not just surprising, it's shocking. Trump really is waving the white flag here. The quote from the little slip we just saw, Ukraine is gone.
What?
He's ready to declare this war over, and he's ready to install a peace plan that would essentially be a Russian victory plan.
He says Ukraine's gone. He also says so many dead on the Ukrainian side. He doesn't mention, of course, the 1 million Russian casualties.
It's true that Ukraine and Russia both are just punching themselves into the ground. I just was in Ukraine. I wrote after that visit that Ukraine is bleeding out. There's a generation that's dying on the battlefields. It is a horrific war, but the idea that the answer to that, this terrible, terrible sacrifice, is to essentially concede to Russia and to Putin his demands, as I said at the beginning, it's shocking. So, question for me is, when are Republicans who widely disagree with this on Capitol Hill going to say something? Going to say this is unacceptable to us, that our candidate speaks in effect on behalf of the adversary of our ally, Ukraine.
And as president, he will act. He will support Vladimir Putin.
Yeah. But it is true that the war in Ukraine is nearing a crisis point. Ukraine cannot continue indefinitely. And it either needs more weapons or it needs a new jolt of American-led diplomacy. But this current status quo, as long as it takes, idea that we've had, let's just keep fighting a war of attrition and someday the Russians will give up, that's really not a sensible strategy.
It's not a sensible strategy for the Ukrainians. It's not a sensible strategy for the Russians either, because like you said, they're pounding each other into the ground.
Russian casualties are significantly worse than Ukrainian. There's some new figures that are coming out. I mean, it's shocking the way that, as people say, the butcher's bill that's been paid by Russia in this war is just horrifying.
Right. Jackie, it was fascinating during Donald Trump's first term. You would have him, of course, humiliating himself in Helsinki, with Jonathan Lemire asking questions that he walked right into traps in Helsinki, but humiliating himself time and time again, kowtowing to Vladimir Putin. And yet, not only did Republicans on the Hill hold the line, but Mike Pence at the same time as vice president would go to, I think it was Munich, and he would deliver speeches about Russia that Ronald Reagan could have delivered himself. So there's always been this divide in the Republican Party. I'm curious right now, from your sense, are there still a majority of Republicans on Capitol Hill that support pushing back on Vladimir Putin?
It's a dwindling majority. It's a cohort that is losing their courage and losing members. I mean, Mitt Romney is out of office in January. He's retiring. He's been one of the biggest and really one of the lone outspoken proponents of continuing aid. Earlier this year, we saw 22 Republicans who ultimately defied Donald Trump's wishes not to support new aid that was going to Ukraine. But again, it's very unlikely. I mean, there's obviously a huge unknown here about who's going to win the presidential election and in Congress, too, whether or not, there might be a trifecta potentially, or if House Republicans are going to hold the majority in the lower chamber, and whether Democrats are going to be able to hold their very narrow majority in the Senate. But that is seeming increasingly unlikely. Jon Tester obviously has been defying political gravity for decades now in his career. So he
may be feeling gravity's pull.
Yeah.
As REM said.
The small amount of leverage that Republicans have in terms of being, pro-Ukraine and in favor of America having a robust role in global affairs, that is dwindling.
So, Ed Luce, Volodymyr Zelensky was presenting a peace plan to the UN yesterday, obviously in these meetings as well. Is there any potential for both sides to see what we're talking about here and say maybe there's an imperfect solution to this to end the fighting?
I wish I could say yes, but I don't think that's possible right now. Remember, yesterday, Vladimir Putin did something else that has had surprisingly little attention, which is he revised Russia's nuclear doctrine. He revised it downwards. He lowered the bar to say that countries that are supplying conventional weapons that are then targeted on Russia would qualify as crossing Russia's nuclear threshold. So what essentially he's saying is, America, if you listen to Zelensky, if you listen to his request that you use ATACMS or Storm Shadows or whatever the artillery is to strike inside Russia, you won't know whether we're going to nuke you or not. You are crossing our threshold. So those are not the signals of a man who's prepared to sit down and talk. But even if he were prepared to sit down and talk, it would be on Putin-Trump kind of terms. It would be, how are you going to surrender? With details of, what the surrender would look like and how long it would take. This is not a position in which Ukraine wishes to end this war.
Ed, I want to ask you about your reporting, David, Jackie, about your reporting on this question of how far Vladimir Putin would go. Because I will say, I am very frustrated with Trumpists saying abandon Ukraine. But there is another side of this that the Biden administration fills the poll every day, and they're from friends of mine, fellow conservatives, fellow former Cold Warriors, who basically want Ukraine to sing Marching to Zion, riding on American missiles straight into Moscow. And anytime you suggest there is the possibility that Vladimir Putin would use nuclear weapons, like, oh, come on, please, he hasn't yet. Let me just speak for myself. I've spoken to foreign leaders who know Vladimir Putin, who have told me, back him into a corner, and he will use nuclear weapons. And if you don't believe he will, you're a fool.
Yeah, I mean, you can't sort of take this lightly. I would sort of get somewhere in between.
And yet there are so many people that take this lightly and say, oh, Biden should give him this. Oh, Biden should. And they did from the very beginning.
They did. I mean, I think we've discovered as this war has gone on that his nuclear red lines are not quite as close as we thought, very understandably, early on in the war.
Exactly, but that does not mean he doesn't have nuclear red lines. And this is the mistake. This, if you want to call it the neoconservative, the aging Cold Warrior wing, that's what we'll call it. But they act as if there is no red line.
There's a reason why Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister of Britain, there's a reason why the Polish government, there's a reason why other governments are now saying, look, they're agreeing with Zelensky, look, let's give him the ability to target sites in Russia that are firing at us. We cannot fight. We cannot get anywhere near the position where we'd like to negotiate a settlement unless we can strike back on even terms. Somebody used the analogy the other day. I mean, David would know this better. It's like there's all these arrows coming in. And you can shoot some of them down, but you're not allowed to target the archer. That is not a fair fight. And Biden has said all along, with two goals here. One is to give Ukraine the means to defend itself, and two, not to start World War III. And it's a difficult furrow to plow in between those two goals, because some of the tools Ukraine needs to defend itself might cross Putin's nuclear red line. You're right.
David?
So, Joe, I think there has been an effort by Zelensky to shame the United States into providing significantly greater support in the face of these threats. I've certainly heard that in Kyiv a couple weeks ago. It bothers me when I hear our president attacked as being weak-willed when he is, as Ed said, been pretty consistent that he views his job as supporting Ukraine, resisting this invasion as strongly as he can, but also avoiding a direct U.S.-Russian war. Any U.S. president who didn't take that seriously as a responsibility shouldn't be in the job. There's one other point that's, I think, significant. U.S. military officials that I talk to caution that shooting ATACMS 300 kilometers into Russia when Russia has already moved back all the good targets. They are now out of range. The things you'd want to hit, the airplanes, the missile sites, they pulled them back. That you won't get a